Today on Rock Feed, we've got news from Foo Fighters frontman Dave Grohl. He had some very interesting things to say about Nirvana. Slipknot frontman Corey Taylor talking about the future of rock and roll. It is very important to keep this music going, and how he's not ready to give up on the genre as so many other people seem to. Behemoth's frontman Nergal is in court for disrespecting Poland, if you can believe that. We've got a lot to talk about. Stick with us. Welcome to Rock Feed. We'll get to this Dave Grohl story in just a moment, but we're going to talk about Corey Taylor in a new interview with Danny Wimmers Presents, talking about the future of rock music and where it's going. Of course, there are a lot of people that would say that rock music is dead. It has certainly receded from mainstream view, but it's not to say that there isn't an interest in rock music. Hip-hop culture is very welcoming to rock music. Sometimes we don't reciprocate that as much as we should. And again, rock music is still something that's obviously very meaningful. You see that when you go to these Danny Wimmers Presents festivals and you see 100,000 people coming out to these massive festivals, or, you know, for instance, the stadium tour like Motley Crue was planning to do this year and will be doing next year. The only problem is these crowds are typically drawn by older artists, and the question is, how do you cultivate these younger fan bases, and what has to happen for that? And Corey Taylor had a lot of insight on that, as always. Here's what he had to say. Speaking to Offstage with DWP, Corey Taylor said, "I know a ton of younger bands that play their own instruments, that play in-your-face rock. They're rebelling against what the rebellion was against us. So they're going back to basics in a lot of ways. Not to toot my son's horn too much, but his band, they're the real deal. They were insane. I was at their first show, and there was no sampling, there was no nothing. They just came on and they just punched the shit out of the audience for 30 minutes. I was exhausted. They did it all on their own, and I think there's a whole new generation of fans coming up that are gonna do that." Of course, when you have very prominent artists like Post Malone, who is a noted metalhead, he recently did a stream of Nirvana entirely. He performed it, played the guitar and everything. You should check that out. It's over on his channel. Billie Eilish, the late Juice WRLD, as we talked about here yesterday, it obviously places a spotlight on rock music. But the question is, what do you do once that spotlight is there? Do you have these new up-and-coming artists for people to gravitate to? You have younger bands like Greta Van Fleet, but Greta Van Fleet's sound is much more appealing to older audiences who grew up listening to Led Zeppelin. They're not necessarily targeting a very young audience. Maybe they have some younger fans. Of course, you have bands like Slipknot. They're not that old, but they have been around for greater than 20 years now. But bands like Slipknot do have a lot of younger fans, so we just got to find that in between. You have bands like Code Orange that are coming up that are, you know, gathering a lot of fans. You have bands like, obviously, I Prevail that are growing exponentially out there. Falling in Reverse is obviously doing very well on the charts, and people don't really mention Falling in Reverse a lot, but you know, they're doing very well. Ronnie Radke and their hit single Popular Monster has been ruling the charts, and obviously every single he's been doing for the last year or more, last couple of years, has been doing insane numbers on YouTube alone. So look, not everything is all doom and gloom. And speaking of that, we're going to talk about something positive. Metallica is donating almost $300,000 to COVID-19 related causes. We talked about how Shinedown raised over $300,000 with their new single Atlas Falls directly to COVID related causes. Metallica has a charitable organization called All Within My Hands. They do so much good work, and here's more about Metallica. Metallica's All Within My Hands Foundation will be administering new grants. This totals $295,000. Metallica said in a statement, "We are truly overwhelmed by the generosity of fans and friends around the world as many continue to face unimaginable challenges in the wake of coronavirus pandemic." Now, this next story is very strange. It involves Behemoth frontman Nergal, and he has been formally charged by the Polish government for the band's Republic of the Unfaithful tour artwork, which they say was insulting to the national arms of Poland, the coat of arms. Just a few months later, Nergal said that the charges were being dropped and he was no longer being prosecuted, but now he's offered a new update saying that he is being investigated again for the same crime. It seems like they cannot make up their mind on this. He wrote, "So some idiots still claim that the Republic of the Unfaithful logo is a sacrilege of the Polish national anthem. It is not, in fact, but they insisted to reopen the case to investigate further. They think that copyrights of White Eagle is solely owned by Poland, and every other interpretation of the bird is a blasphemy. My antagonists seem to be so desperate to nail their favorite scapegoat to their rotten moral cross that they miss the common sense in the narrative. They accuse us of an anti-Polish act. If you ask me, spending hours in the court, engaging all the people all around, journalists, judges, lawyers, spending XXX tax money on another absurd case is deeply anti-Polish. We could have saved this time to do something creative, couldn't we?" He shared the following pictures of himself as well in the Polish court. And we'll let you know as we get additional updates on this very strange situation involving Behemoth. Next up, there's a new interview on Beats One with Foo Fighters frontman Dave Grohl, and he goes back to what led to the band's formation, obviously, and how he had been writing some of these songs as early as 1991 that eventually came out on the Foo Fighters debut album. And Dave reflects on his time in Nirvana, and he points out that he didn't know the other members of Nirvana before he joined the band. They weren't close. Everyone he had previously been in bands with were very close personal friends. And so he always had this underlying worry that he was going to get kicked out of the band, because at that point, Nirvana was on their 5th drummer. So when the band rose to critical fame, Dave Grohl was always concerned that he was going to get booted from the band. And actually, there are some reports that at one time, if you can believe this, with as talented as Dave Grohl is, that Kurt Cobain actually considered kicking him out of the band, but that's been largely unverified at this point. But here is Dave Grohl speaking to Beats One about that worry.
Every band I'd been in before then was with like friends that I'd known for a really long time. You're just starting to get to know each other, and it sounds great when you play music. You're just starting to get to know each other, but there's not like a deep personal connection. And then the band becomes really huge really quickly. You're just so nervous that you're going to either get fired or it's going to stop, or I didn't want to get fired, basically. And so I was, I was doing my best to like keep this thing from going away. So there was this, a real insecurity that I had. They're going to find somebody else.
So this seems to be the ultimate form of imposter syndrome with Dave Grohl, thinking that they were going to kick him out of the band, knowing how talented he was, knowing how many fans he had at that time. And people were very interested in Kurt Cobain, obviously being the front man. But Dave also had a following from that group, which is why when Nirvana obviously broke up after the Kurt Cobain tragedy, he even pointed out that he was getting so many calls from people asking him to join their band and go on tour with them. And he actually entertained some very, very major offers in that endeavor. So anyways, that is all for now. Thanks so much for joining us today at Rockfeed. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss out on breaking news and updates. Thanks again, and we'll see you all very soon.